2013 Honda Pilot. I'm going to show you guys how to replace the passenger side CV axle, the whole axle assembly that goes there. So take the wheel off, jacked it up from here, and I have my wheel here for safety. Then I got two jack stands because you can never be too safe. First step is you got to remove these two screws holding the rotor. We're gonna go ahead and remove the whole rotor and the caliper assembly as well. In order to remove these two screws, if they're stuck, you might need to use a impact screwdriver, or you can use a flat head right here with the metal tip, and then just use a hammer on this angle until it starts turning like that. So go ahead and take these two off. Then we're gonna go back here and we're gonna remove those two 19mm bolt holding the bracket, the caliper bracket, one and one under here, right here. So go ahead and remove those two. What I did is I have my ratchet right here, locked it in place like that. Then I use a hammer to break it loose. Same for this one right here. And then go ahead and insert your flathead screwdriver and just kind of relieve the pressure in that caliper a little bit, because when you take those two bolts off, we're gonna go ahead and slide the whole caliper out, and then we should be able to remove the rotor after that. All right, so I got the caliper tied up here. I would recommend getting something sturdy to hold that up because the caliper is kind of heavy. Also went ahead and took off the 12mm bolt that's holding the brake line, so you have more room to move it around. And go ahead and remove the caliper, the rotor. If your rotor is stuck, you might have to give it a few taps right here. If you're gonna reuse the rotor, do not hit it from here because you can damage the rotor. Go ahead and break it loose. Once we take that off, we're gonna have to remove this bolt right here. This is gonna be a 24, that's a 24mm. If you don't have an impact gun, use something like this to break it loose. That's not coming out. Actually, my bad. We gotta break it loose from here, not that one. Let's see if we can take it off now. This one I do not have enough room for my gun to fit right here, so I'm going to use my ratchet for that one. But go ahead and take those, break it loose, and then our next step is, once we take these two bolts off, we're going to be able to pull back the spindle. But before you do that, go ahead and remove the axle nut. That's going to be a 36mm. Again, if you don't have a impact gun, what you need to do is, I probably should have mentioned it in the beginning of the video. Yeah, you're probably gonna need an impact gun. If you don't have one, since I got the car kind of raced up, use something like this to kind of break it loose. But that's a 36mm socket. All right, now we should be able to take these two bolts off, and then we can remove the spindle or rock it back and forth, and then we can push this in. You can give it a tap if you want, and then we can pull the whole thing back, and that should free the axle on this side. But then we got to get to that side right there. All right, so we got the bottom bolt off. We're gonna take the top one off. Just gonna give it a slight tap, and then we're gonna tap this in. careful with that sensor right here. Make sure you don't damage that. Right. Now, should be able to pull this back. Then we can keep tapping that axle back in. You can use a screwdriver to push it in. Kind of need both of my hands to do it, but what I would usually do, I was put my left hand here and pull it back, and then I'd tap it right here. Alright, so it looks like we got to remove that sensor too, because it's putting too much pressure in this one. That's a 10mm for that speed sensor. Take that 10mm bolt off and then remove the sensor. Alright guys, so I kept tapping it from inside right here, my flathead screwdriver. Then I used a pry bar to pry it out completely. So now it's free. If you want to remove this tie rod right here, you can, to make it easier, but I didn't want to mess with it because most of the time when it's old and you take it off, you could mess it up some more. So I just left it there. All right, now we're gonna go inside right here, and we have those two bolts right there. Let me find out. They look like they are 13mm. I'm not sure. Let me find out. All right, guys. So to remove those two bolts right here, that's inside right there, which is right here. That's the new one. You got two bolts holding that bearing. They're 14mm. I used my gun to remove it. They're in there pretty tight. If you don't have this one, you might have to put some muscle into it to break it loose. The bottom one, you can reach it from underneath, but the top one, you gotta come from in here. Once you take that off, you should be able to just pull it out. Also, make sure you have a pan right there, because you're gonna have some transmission fluid leaking right now. Yep, I see it leaking right now. So make sure you have something to catch it with. Then you should be able to pull this whole thing out. Alright, so just pull it straight. The whole thing will come out. Now this is my new one. Just make sure you compare it. Yeah. Now installing it. When you put it back in, you're gonna want it to hear it kind of click inside the transmission when you push it in. Make sure you double check that it's all the way in there. One of the technique that I use is I hold it from here with my left hand, and I push it here with my right hand, and I just shove it in there until you hear it kind of click or lock in place. If you don't hear it kind of lock or click inside that right there, then that means it's not all the way in. So make sure you shove it in there pretty good, and the rest is just reverse order. All right guys, so I got the axle all the way in there. So what I did is I made sure that the inner part goes straight. So you can see those two bolts that I took off, so they're kind of angled, so make sure you put it the right way the first time. And then what I did is I kind of put my hand right here. I was holding it from here, and I just kind of kept shoving it in there until I feel it go in flush. And when I mean flush, I'm gonna show it to you right now. Right here, you should be able to see it flush against that transmission case. Make sure it's all the way in there. If it's not all the way in there and you don't hear that click, you should hear that click, the click noise or clicking feeling when you shove it in there, then that means you're not in there. So grab the axle straight, just keep shoving it in there until you feel it go down all the way. Make sure that you align this one properly. That's it. Also, I forgot to mention, so I had a little bit of transmission fluid leak out, so get you some Honda transmission fluid and just kind of fill it up from the transmission, top it off. Just make sure you don't forget that. All right guys, so I got my axle all the way in there. Got my 2 bolts tight. Also put the spindle bolts back on in here. When you put this on, or before you put this on, make sure you align this side of the axle back in the hub. You might have to kind of play with it, kind of bend it, and then eventually it'll slide back in here. Once it's in there all the way, put this axle nut back on. Put these 2 bolts back on. You might have to push down on the suspension. You can move this back and forth to kind of align the holes in the bolt and the bolts together. And then put your axle nut back on. Go ahead and torque that, and then don't forget to, once it's torqued all the way in, don't forget to punch this in with a flathead screwdriver and lock it in place with that notch right here. Put your caliper back on, double check everything, make sure you put all the bolts, your caliper bolts, put your rotor back on, and that's it guys. I hope this video helped you guys out. If you guys got any questions, comment below, give me a thumbs up, click on the subscribe button, and again, thanks for watching.